What happens when a flight attendant questions a quiet woman's right to wear a simple cross around her neck without realizing that woman is Karoline Leavitt? What began as a subtle act of judgment over a silver crucifix turned into a powerful moment that would shake an entire flight. And by the time they landed, no one would forget what she said. And let's start with the fateful flight that created a huge shock. Los Angeles International Airport was a storm of movement, a living, breathing machine of travelers, their fates intertwined for mere moments before being pulled in opposite directions. The check-in counters buzzed with impatience. Security lines stretched endlessly, the symphony of beeping scanners and frustrated sighs filling the air. Amid the controlled chaos, Karoline Leavitt moved with steady, purposeful steps. She wasn't in a rush, nor did she blend into the hurried mass of humanity around her. She carried herself differently, not with arrogance, not with self-importance, but with a quiet certainty that made her stand out. There was no security entourage, no flashing cameras, no frantic assistants checking schedules. Just her and a small carry-on slung neatly over one shoulder. It was as if she belonged here, and yet, in some unspoken way, didn't. But one thing made her presence unmistakable. A sliver cross, small but radiant, hung against the fabric of her blouse. It was not meant to draw attention, but it did. The way it caught the glow of the fluorescent airport lights, the way it rested just over her heart, as though it belonged there, as though it was more than just an accessory. She stepped into the priority boarding line and handed over her ticket. The flight attendant standing at the gate was Alyssa, sharp, efficient, and professional to the letter. Her uniform was pressed to perfection. Her name tag gleamed, and her posture carried the polished stiffness of someone who had memorized every line of corporate policy by heart. She took one glance at Karoline's boarding pass, then at Karoline herself. And then there was hesitation. Not long, just a fraction of a second, the kind of pause too small to be outright noticeable, but long enough to feel. Alyssa's gaze flicked over her. Simple blouse, fitted jeans, not overdressed, but put together in a way that radiated quiet power. Yet something about her presence was disruptive, not in the way of someone making a scene, but in the way of someone who didn't fit the mold. After that split second of scrutiny, Alyssa forced a smile. One of those smiles that came from training, not from warmth. "Welcome aboard, Miss Leavitt," she said. She scanned the ticket, handed it back. But her eyes followed Karoline as she walked past. And then, it happened. As Karoline shifted her bag over her shoulder, the gold cross slipped fully into view against her blouse. Alyssa's expression froze, just for a second, and in that single second, everything changed. Her polite demeanor stiffened. Her grip on the boarding pass tightened just slightly. And suddenly, as Karoline disappeared into the jet bridge, Alyssa wasn't so sure she should have let her board at all. Her steps became measured, deliberate. She followed into the aircraft. She had let her on the plane, but now she wasn't sure she should have. And a confrontation at 35,000 feet has coming. The plane hummed steadily as it ascended into the sky, piercing through the thick layer of clouds. Below them, the city of Los Angeles faded into the vastness of the Pacific. Inside the first-class cabin, luxury settled like a well-rehearsed melody. Seats reclined at just the right angle. A soft chime announced that passengers could move freely. Flight attendants glided through the aisles with quiet precision, offering drinks and warm towels. Karoline sat by the window, calm and still, her hands resting on the armrests. She wasn't watching a movie. She wasn't scrolling through emails. She was simply existing. And yet her very presence seemed to disturb Alyssa more than any loud, demanding passenger ever could. From the galley, Alyssa watched her, not because she was causing trouble, not because she was difficult, but because that sliver cross, small, quiet, unwavering, hadn't moved. It was still right there against her chest, as if it had no business being anywhere else. Alyssa had dealt with celebrities before, the kind who barked orders, who demanded special treatment, who barely looked at the flight crew as they snapped their fingers for another drink. But this was different. Karoline wasn't being difficult. She wasn't causing a disturbance. But somehow Alyssa felt uneasy. She took a breath, not too deep, just enough to steady herself, then walked down the aisle, stopping at Caroline's row. She cleared her throat softly, leaning in. "Ms. Leavitt," she said, her voice dipped in polite professionalism. "I'd like to remind you that we have policies regarding religious symbolism in shared spaces, especially in premium cabins. We ask for discretion." Caroline turned her head slowly. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were piercingly aware. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cool but laced with a sharp edge of clarity. Alyssa clasped her hands in front of her, tilting her head just slightly, as if offering a reasonable compromise. "Some passengers may find certain symbols divisive," she explained, her tone even. "We simply ask everyone to be considerate. Perhaps you could tuck it in." She motioned vaguely toward the necklace, as though it was out of place, as though it shouldn't be there. Caroline didn't respond right away. She reached up, lightly touching the cross, feeling the smooth edges, the familiar weight of it against her fingers. Then she turned fully to face Alyssa. Her voice didn't waver. Her hand didn't move toward the necklace. "This isn't a fashion statement." The words came softly, but with the force of something unshakable. "It's part of who I am." In a shift in the cabin, a businessman glanced up from his laptop. A woman paused mid-page in her book. A subtle energy, a ripple of awareness, spread through the first-class cabin. Alyssa's posture straightened. She was used to compliance. She was used to people nodding, tucking, adjusting, compromising to maintain the order she had been trained to uphold. But Caroline wasn't nodding. She wasn't adjusting. She was holding firm. Alyssa swallowed. And then she tried again. "We just want to ensure a neutral environment, Miss Leavitt," she said, a little firmer this time. Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly, and then she asked the question that shattered the entire conversation. "Neutral for who?" Silence. Thick, heavier than the pressurized air inside the aircraft. For the first time, Alyssa had no response. She hesitated. Alyssa had expected compliance, the usual, predictable reaction. A quick nod, a forced, apologetic smile, and the quiet gesture of tucking the necklace beneath Caroline's blouse. She had seen it before. People adjusted, they conformed, but Caroline didn't move. She wasn't being aggressive. She wasn't making a scene, but she wasn't backing down either. And that was new. A hum of unease rippled through the first-class cabin. It was subtle, an energy shift. A businessman 2 rows back subtly removed an earbud. A woman across the aisle lifted her eyes from her book, her fingers pausing on the edge of the page. Even a flight attendant in the galley peeked from behind the curtain, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Caroline felt it. She saw it in their eyes, the passengers who had been indifferent moments ago, now alert. They weren't just listening, they were watching. Alyssa reset, trying to regain her control over the moment. "This isn't about your personal beliefs, Ms. Leavitt," she said, keeping her voice measured, professional. Caroline's gaze was steady. "If someone else wore a pendant of a tree, a star, or a stone, would you ask them to hide it?" Alyssa blinked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She reset, tried to pivot. "That's not what this is about." Caroline didn't break eye contact. "Then what is it about?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alyssa had no answer, and the silence stretched too long. A murmur drifted through the cabin. It wasn't loud, but it was noticeable. Passengers whispered, exchanged glances. Their expressions weren't ones of judgment. They were admiration. Alyssa shifted on her feet, suddenly feeling exposed, as if the entire cabin had turned into a courtroom and she was standing trial. Without another word, she turned sharply and walked back toward the galley. But the damage was already done, because now it wasn't Caroline under scrutiny. It was the policy itself, and the final stand, the words no one expected. The air inside the cabin felt different now. Passengers weren't just watching a moment unfold, they were now invested in it. And Alyssa? She felt it. The conversation hadn't gone the way she planned. She wasn't sure why this woman, this quiet, unwavering woman in seat 2A, bothered her so much. Maybe it was because Caroline hadn't argued. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't resisted with defiance, only with conviction. And somehow, that was more difficult to confront. Alyssa lingered in the galley, breathing in through her nose, then out. She needed to fix this, to take back control. So she did something she had never done before. She went to get the captain. Minutes later, Alyssa returned, but this time she wasn't alone. Captain Morales walked beside her, mid-50s, seasoned, weathered but kind, the kind of man whose calm presence could steady turbulence without saying a word. Passengers straightened in their seats, sensing something bigger at play. He stopped in front of Karoline's seat. His voice was calm but firm. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, "I understand there's been some concern regarding a policy. I'd like to hear your side." Passengers leaned in. This wasn't just a quiet conversation anymore. This was a moment, one they wouldn't forget. Karoline met his eyes, unapologetic, unwavering. She touched the cross again, not clutching it, not making a show of it, just acknowledging it. Then she spoke. "Your flight attendant asked me to hide this," she said. Her voice was steady but layered with meaning. "I told her no, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because this cross has been with me through war zones, through hospital rooms, through nights I thought I wouldn't wake from." A silence thickened between them. She took a breath, but she wasn't finished. "It's not about ideology," she said softly. "It's about survival, about faith." The entire cabin was silent, not the forced silence of an awkward confrontation, but the silence that comes when something true is spoken. Captain Morales listened carefully. Then he turned to Alyssa. His voice was even, unreadable. "Did she raise her voice?" Alyssa hesitated. "No, sir." "Was she disruptive in any way?" Another beat of silence. Alyssa's throat tightened. "No, sir." Captain Morales let out a slow breath. Then he turned back to Karoline, and what he said changed everything. "Ms. Leavitt, you are free to wear your cross." A pause. Alyssa's shoulders stiffened. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding, some whispering. Then a voice from the back of the cabin. "Amen to that." A chuckle rippled through the air. The tension cracked. Karoline simply gave a quiet nod. Alyssa stepped back. Her pride had been shaken. But Karoline? She wasn't gloating. She wasn't triumphant. She had simply held her ground. And as the captain turned and walked back toward the cockpit, the passengers felt it. This wasn't just about a policy anymore. This was about what it meant to stand for something. The flight continued. Businessmen went back to their laptops. The woman across the aisle picked up her book again, but with a small, thoughtful smile. Alyssa lingered near the galley. She didn't say a word, but she knew, deep down, that this moment would stay with her longer than she'd like, because she had been trained to enforce rules. But for the first time, she had been forced to question them. And as the hum of the aircraft settled into the steady rhythm of flight, one truth remained. No one, not a single person on that plane, would ever forget what happened that day. As the plane cruised through the sky, the world below seemed unchanged. But inside that cabin, something had shifted. It wasn't just about a piece of jewelry or a policy. It was about the quiet power of standing firm in one's convictions. Karoline didn't need to argue or demand. Her unwavering presence had spoken louder than any debate ever could. And long after the wheels touched down, the memory of that moment would linger, not just in the minds of those who witnessed it, but in the hearts of those who finally saw the truth. Do you believe Karoline was right to stand her ground? Let us know in the comments. If you believe in faith and freedom, share this story. If you believe in standing up for your rights, let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that matter.